From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is AgDay.
Coming up on AgDay, a cowboy staple that's making a comeback. So we put our heart and soul into the boots. See the workmanship that goes into making a pair of Texas cowboy boots. Republican Senator Chuck Grassley continues to press for answers from the EPA on those small refinery waivers.
They just don't trust EPA.
As the president sends out an optimistic message about a possible trade deal with China.
AgDay, presented by the Chevy Silverado and the all-new Silverado HD, the strongest, most advanced family of Silverados ever.
Good morning, I'm Clinton Griffiths. We begin with a developing story we're following and the possibility we are moving closer to a phase 1 trade deal with China. President Trump himself tweeting out, quote, he tweeted that 5 minutes after the stock market opened, sending stocks jumping to a new record. Commodities also rising on the news. The Wall Street Journal reporting U.S. trade negotiators are offering to cancel a new round of tariffs on China that are scheduled to be put in place on Sunday, and Bloomberg reporting that the president has approved that plan to delay those December 15th tariffs. It's also reported they have offered to cut existing tariffs by up to 50% on $375 billion worth of Chinese goods. USDA Secretary Sonny Perdue telling Fox Business Chinese officials told the president they would buy up to $50 billion worth of American farm goods, but were reluctant to commit to contracts. Now, Perdue saying it's a problem. China's willing to make commitments behind closed doors, but then is slow to agree to contracts. The market's also being fueled by good export news, starting with a big flash sale of corn to Mexico. The country buying 1,600,000 metric tons of corn this year and another 525,000 metric tons for next year. And last week's export sales also bringing some good news. Wheat sales were up 33% from the prior 4-week average. The increases reported for Japan and the Philippines. Corn sales, they were up 60% from the previous week, with the top buyers being Mexico and Japan. And soybeans also up 54% higher from the previous week, and increases for unknown destinations and China. Happening now, an agricultural labor bill is making its way to the Senate. That's after the House passed the Farm Workforce Modernization Act on Wednesday by a vote of 260 to 165. The bill's designed to give legal status to undocumented farm workers and to modernize the H-2A guest worker program. Though the legislation is considered bipartisan in the House, there are still disagreements on it, even within the same party lines.
Most notably, we don't have the slightest idea of how many individuals this bill will put on a pathway to citizenship. And while I'd like to think that all of our agricultural workers are trustworthy, good people, we don't have any way to verify that before granting certified agricultural work status.
The intensely labor needful crops would disappear. We will end up importing them from somewhere else if we don't have this workforce that continues. This bill makes for a legal workforce, a documented workforce. Why wouldn't we want that?
The current H-2A program only covers for seasonal employment. Also in Washington, Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley reiterating his message to the Environmental Protection Agency to improve language when it comes to those small refinery exemptions in its ethanol and biodiesel rule. The Republican was vocal with reporters about how the EPA should improve the proposed rule it released regarding small refinery exemptions for ethanol and biodiesel, and the public comment period for the supplemental rule closed last month. The agency is set to finalize it by the end of this year. Grassley says the proposed verbiage raises questions about how many gallons are actually guaranteed by the rule and isn't good enough for farm country.
That's most every farmer that raises corn, and the biofuels industry, they just don't trust EPA. So the language of the bill has to be, the language of the rule has to be very, very precise. That was my message to them.
The National Corn Growers Association also calling on the EPA and President Trump to make the RFS rule right. Snow, ice, and rain all have the potential to hit portions of the country. Meteorologist Cindy Clausen is tracking a system for the southeast. She joins us with more.
That's right, Clinton. We've already seen a fair amount of rain in the southeast, some spots seeing well over an inch, even 2 to 3 inches. Now, this is the past 24 hours, but the next 24 hours, as we see a system riding all the way up the east coast, you can see all of that moisture spreading up the eastern seaboard. And on the very back end of that, we'll start to see a little snow as we get into later Friday night and into Saturday. Well, let's take a look at a picture. The colors of the sunsets have been spectacular recently. Check out this picture shared on Twitter by J. Lazy S. Angus Ranch in Carmen, Idaho. Besides the beautiful sunset, there's also her horse, Sparrow, saying good evening to everyone. This is a gorgeous, gorgeous picture. Thank you so much for sharing. We'll take a look at your national forecast coming up.
The 2018 Farm Bill was designed to be a safety net. Up next, we'll talk about some of those options and considerations for 2020, an analysis, and later scoot on down to Texas, where these kicks are still being made the old-fashioned way in the country. Today on Ag Day. Iowa farmland values were down as a whole for 2018. Iowa State University releasing its land values survey for 2018 earlier in the week. The survey shows the average statewide value of an acre of farmland is now more than $7,200. That's a decrease of $62 per acre, or a dip of 0.8% from 2017. Now, it's the fourth decline in the past 5 years. In agribusiness, big exports and talk of Chinese purchases sent grain prices higher on Thursday. Let's see how those markets closed from the floor of the CME.
Yesterday, we saw the market really continue to break down, specifically in the corn. The March contract is a month of interest for us. We broke below recent lows, and it looked like we were going to head and retest those contract lows at 365 3/4. Morale was as low as it could possibly be, but we finally got some headlines here this morning. Good export sales this morning. Private exports really boosted the market. On top of that, we got some tariff talk that added some additional momentum to the market. Soybean also catching a bit off the lows. We filled the gap from December 6th, but now just hovering around that psychologically significant $9 handle. This is going to be very headline driven. The headlines can be a double-edged sword. The market giveth and the market taketh away, so keep an eye on what those headlines say with regards to tariffs going into the weekend. And we're continuing to see the February live cattle just trade mostly sideways, both sides have unchanged, but we haven't been going anywhere real fast. And you can see that on the chart. In fact, we've closed in between 123.85 and 126 for 27 of the last 29 sessions. This has been Oliver Slope with Blue Line Futures from the floor of the CME.
There are plenty of decisions to be made in 2020. Many will be based on final yield numbers and trade discussions, but there may be some options related to the 2018 Farm Bill that are worth considering. Tyne Morgan continues the conversation from Kansas City.
Here now with Scott Brown, economist for University of Missouri. Scott, let's talk about Farm Bill. Something we're really not talking a lot about. Is it because, we've seen some of the financial pressure eased by MFP? Do you think that's why it's rather quiet on the Farm Bill side? Or why are we not talking about it like we typically would in a year like this?
I think a lot of producers are just trying to take a breath for a minute after what's been a terribly long year. But you're correct. We're in a situation where now they can start thinking about their ARC PLC decision that they have to make for 2019 and 2020 together.
Okay, so when you look at this decision, I'm hearing from some that maybe PLC makes more sense. Maybe PLC would pay on corn this year. Is that a wise decision?
I think it's going to vary for every farm, so it's hard to give any kind of blanket statement about what's the best option. One needs to look at their program yields relative to the county yields if you're kind of making that choice between PLC and ARC County. I remind us, if USDA's average price is $3.70, you get zero for PLC. So we're right near the triggers. It's going to make it a difficult decision. It's not as clear cut as when we signed up in 2014.
We have a lot of producers out there fearful, especially in the northern plains where it's been so wet, having a hard time even harvesting this year's crop, concerned about prevent plant for next year. Is there an option within the farm programs that could cater to someone that's in that arena?
Yeah, so I do think for those that are 100% prevent plant in 2019, they need to look at ARC individual coverage. So that was an option in the 2014 Farm Bill. We didn't see hardly anyone take advantage of it, but a zero yield, since it's now your farm yields that matter, could certainly make ARC individual coverage look like a good alternative. Now you need to be 100% prevent plant, I think, for that to work. But for those producers that were completely 100% prevent plant on a particular farm number, they should look very hard at that program again.
Wheat, ARC or PLC? I mean, it was pretty clear cut last time it seemed. This time around, has much changed?
Not much has changed. I think you look PLC there. For soybeans, you're probably still leaning a little more towards that ARC program just because we're further away from the PLC reference price than we are in things like corn and wheat.
I mean, these are some big decisions that need to be made pretty soon.
They are, and they have to be made by March 15th. I encourage producers, number one, maybe I want to see the January crop production report before I go sign up for 19 and 20, but I don't think you have to wait till March 15th to make this decision.
Scott Brown, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. Let's take a quick break, and then we'll have a check of weather right here on Ag Day.
Ag Day, brought to you by Precision Planting, provider of practical and effective precision ag technologies to help make farmers smarter every season. Learn more at precisionplanting.com.
Meteorologist Cindy Clausen take a look at the National Weather Map for us. And Cindy, this Pacific Northwest has kind of seen some unsettled weather lately.
Yeah, a lot of the West actually has. So rain and higher elevation snow, and that's exactly what we're going to be seeing more of today. And as we mentioned, yeah, we've had this rain and upper elevation snow for several weeks now, just kind of off and on. We've been seeing that unsettled weather. We're going to have another low out in the west, and so look for some rain and higher elevation snow there. And while the southern plains a little bit on the quiet side today, we're still going to see some areas of snow in the north central United States heading into the Great Lakes. But this is kind of the big wet weather maker right here. That's going to move into the southeast, into the mid-Atlantic states, and then all the way up into the northeast. Most of it rain, but we'll start to see a little bit colder air coming in, especially as we get into Saturday. On the very back edge of that, as it starts to move into the northeastern parts of the United States, you can see it finally starting to get enough cold air to see some snow on the back side. All right, this is what it looks like now. The past 24 hours, you can see a lot of that has been in the southeast, but even the northwest as well, and then the higher elevations, that has been in the form of snow. That rain really moves up that eastern seaboard there, so many areas seeing 2-3 inches of rain, maybe even higher than that in some spots. And we're going to see again that rain and higher elevation snow in the west. Look at these amounts over the past 24 hours. A lot of these areas over 8 inches of snow, even higher than that in spots. And we're going to just add more to that today. As far as the eastern part of the country, most of that is just right along the U.S.-Canadian border there. All right, so as far as temperatures, we're looking at 50s and 60s. Some of the middle areas of the states, we're getting closer to 80 now in southern Texas, but we still have a pretty big contrast. We're looking at teens as far as those high temperatures in the north central United States. It's going to get cold again into the overnight hours, and we start to see those temperatures dipping down below zero once again in the north central United States. And then as we head through tomorrow, we kind of see that cold air sticking around as the next trough starts to make its way into the nation's midsection. And we have a lot of 30s and 40s as you get into the northeast, 40s and 50s. That's still a little bit on the cool side for parts of the southeast. And the jet stream is going to show that trough. It's kind of all the way down into the southeast, but the real cold air doesn't come back into play mostly for the upper Midwest. But look at this in the early part of next week as another deep trough brings some very cold air to a lot of the north central and northeastern United States. That's a look at your national forecast. Now let's check on the weather where you live. Silverton, Idaho, some light snow today and a high of 36 degrees. Kinsley, Kansas, mostly sunny, a high of 59 degrees. And over into Bowman, South Carolina, rain is likely for you with a high of 51 degrees.
When we come back, an update on the use of antibiotics in livestock and see how a couple of cowboys came to the rescue. And later, those cowboys may need a new pair of boots this holiday season. A look at these handcrafted creations in the country. The sale of antibiotics for livestock rose last year. That's according to research conducted by the FDA. It says domestic sales and distribution of medically important antibiotics increased by 9% in 2018, but it's down by 38% when compared to the peak period of 2015. Now, it's estimated 42% was intended for use in cattle, 39% for use in swine. Tetracyclines represented the largest volume of sales. Between the weather, late harvest, and economic pressures, there's a lot of stress these days in farm country. Now, 3 agencies are teaming up to help farmers and ranchers. Farm Credit, American Farm Bureau Federation, and the National Farmers Union working together to train those who interact with people in farm country to recognize signs of stress and offer help. Now, the program will provide people the skills to understand the sources of stress, learn the warning signs of stress and suicide, identify effective communication strategies, and reduce the stigma related to mental health concerns. Now, AFBF says a recent study shows financial issues, farm or business problems, and fear of losing the farm greatly impact the mental health of farmers and ranchers. That study also says nearly half of rural adults say they are personally experiencing more mental health challenges than they were a year ago. Take a look at this. A couple of Wyoming sheriff's deputies got to use their roping skills recently when they lassoed a deer that had fallen through the ice. The deputies were dispatched to a pond near the small ranching town of Daniel in southwest Wyoming, where someone had reported a deer had fallen through that ice. Because the ice was too thin to walk on, the deputies lassoed the deer and pulled it to shore. It was then taken to a nearby driveway where it could warm up and be left alone. When a deputy checked on the deer a few hours later, it was gone. Roping wouldn't be complete without having on the right pair of boots. We'll take you to a place where the great tradition of boot making is kept alive. Next.
Closed captioning is brought to you by BASF. Grow smart with BASF. We create chemistry.
Now, this is something many farmers would appreciate under the Christmas tree, a real nice pair of cowboy boots. And the fine craftsmanship that went into making them over 100 years ago still goes on today. Our friends over at Texas Farm Bureau take us to one company that's keeping the tradition alive.
Every pair of Canelio boots are made in our factory in Nocona, Texas by our people.
Making a handmade boot takes very much hands-on. From start to finish, more than 50 people touch that boot before it's completed.
We start with raw leather that's brought in from various areas. From there, it is cut into the various pieces of the boots. The tops are assembled first. The tops will go in and get all the fancy stitching done on the tops. And then we fit the vamps and counters to those. Those fronts and backs are side seamed together. We turn the boots right side out. They are lasted, which is shaped around the form of the boot. Then we attach the soles and the heels, and then it moves into final inspection.
The way our boots are constructed is really traditional, and that means to do an all-leather construction. So that means that our insoles are veg finish, heavy leather, the same as the outsoles. They're all cut by hand to our specs.
Boots began being made in Nocona, Texas, or Monte County, I should say, in the 1800s.
H.J. Justin started making boots at Spanish Fort to cowboys that were on their way north with the Chisholm Trail. When they got up there and got paid, and on their way back they could pay for and pick up the boots that he had made for them.
The brothers in the 20s decided they would move to Fort Worth, Texas, and there was a sister that decided she did not want to move, and she started Nocona Boot Company at that time.
My grandfather ran Nocona Boot Company for years and years and years, and after Al retired, my father, David Hellinger, became the plant manager until it closed the doors in August of 1999. He was very determined to have boot making continue in Nocona. He opened what he called the IBBS, which was the Itsy Bitsy Boot Shop, and that was in a metal barn beside his house. Really and truly, it just inspired me to want to come back and be a part of it. It was what my father wanted. He did not want boot making to die in Nocona, Texas, and I thought, well, as long as I'm alive and can do it, I want to continue that for him.
I worked for them for 3 or 4 years, and then they decided that I could acquire the company from them, and I took over operation in 2014. Mine and my father's main reason that we decided to try to keep the company going, and that was for the employees in the community. The town's always had boot making here, and we just didn't want to see it leave. It's their whole life, you know. When people have worked 40 years making boots, and you know, when you see 60 people back there that truly take pride in what they're doing, it's a great thing to see.
Boot making, everybody thought it was dead and gone in Nocona, Texas, and it came back. So we put our heart and soul into the boots. You know, every pair of boots, each one of those, they mean something, they really do. There's fewer and fewer companies making boots on U.S. soil, but also besides just made in the USA, we're very big on the fact that they're in Texas. What is more Texan than a pair of cowboy boots? They credit this county in Texas as being the birthplace of the cowboy boot. So it just means a whole lot to me to continue to get to make boots here in this county, and hopefully this is where the last pair of cowboy boots ever made are still going to be made here in Nocona, Texas.
All right, once again, we thank Texas Farm Bureau for sharing that story, and that's all the time we have this morning. We're sure glad you tuned in, spent part of your day with us. From all of us here at AgDay, I'm Clinton Griffiths. Have a great day.